I'm Nick Harcourt, and I'm going to welcome to the stage in just a moment's time two-time uh, Grammy Award nominee for a producer. He also, according to his Instagram account, says that he creates music for dance floors, cars, and rockets. Please welcome Morgan Page.
Good to see you. Should we go this way? Yeah.
So we're going to have some fun in the next hour or so. You're going to create a song on the fly, which is going to be amazing. We're also going to talk a little bit about your quick tips card deck. But before we get into any of that, maybe we could talk a little bit about content creation, something that has really come of its time through the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of people being at home, looking for things to do. And I know that you yourself really completely changed how you looked at content creation. You got into using video, you got into learning a whole bunch of new stuff. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I noticed during the pandemic, I had all this gear lying around. I had projectors and things, and I thought, let me combine all these webcams and projectors, and maybe I can do a live stream to keep up my practice of DJing, because we had to cancel 60 shows. So I was thinking, well, I've got to stay up to date with this and keep the skills going. So I started doing live streams. We did remote sets with drones out on the top of mountains, and I also did weekly streams from my studio, and I still do that. But it got me thinking, like, how can I incorporate video more, this visual element, and not just music? So music felt like this one spoke of a bicycle wheel, and learning editing programs like DaVinci Resolve, these other skills, learning how to really use vertical video as a canvas, that was really inspiring to me. And I was thinking, I've never taken the time to learn it. This is the perfect time to do it. And the timing just happened to be right on the money with TikTok and Reels, and this is really the canvas we're working with as content creators. You can't just make music and put it out there and hope that it'll blow up. Yeah.
So if you look at what you were doing before and what you're doing now, can you put a percentage on how much more content creation that you're doing?
It's a lot more now. Probably before, maybe I would take. It's hard because it takes time away from the studio, so it's a little bit of a swap. Maybe you have less music, but we try to put out like a new single every month, and then who knows how many pieces of content to support that, 5 or 10 pieces of social media. But it's a juggling act because you're wearing all these different hats. I wasn't expecting. I was afraid to change lens caps on cameras, and now
Sure.
I did a really deep dive into vintage lenses, pairing those with modern high-res sensors, and this whole world opened up of actually marrying the past and the future together, and that's what I use in the live stream. And it's totally automated, as automated switching. I'm the VJ, I'm the DJ, I'm the tour manager. It's like.
So just tell us how that works then. If you're going to set something up and then you're going to go get behind the decks, what buttons have you got to press to get that whole thing going?
It's a lot. There's 4 cameras. There's Arena, Resolume is the VJ software. I've got to get that going on autopilot. Prep all the music. So each week it's an hour of new music. It's 20 new songs that I've only heard once, and I got to mix them on the fly. And that was the challenge, like bring the best in dance music in 1 week, and then that goes to Sirius XM for a show. So it's a lot of work, but for one person. But I do miss, like when we do the remote drone shoots, I'd have 2 other photographers. I'd have a drone pilot and a camera operator.
I was going to say, it's hard to do the drone as well.
Yeah, almost impossible. Even with all these preset modes. I tried once, and I had to like fake it and stitch it in afterwards. It's really hard to do a good mix if you're doing both.
While you're flying a drone, yeah.
And not crash.
Yeah, exactly. In more ways than one, obviously.
Right.
Crash the whole thing. So you mentioned TikTok, and I know that you're active on Instagram Reels as well. How important is that stuff to artists today, and in particular to electronic artists?
I think it's huge. It's all about top of mind awareness. I think it's very easy to forget about your artist. Between release and tour cycles, you got to be out there. And the timing was also really interesting with Quick Tips because these are larger, more complex ideas that are turned into bite-sized little nuggets. So to be able, you have to explain an idea in under 10 seconds. It's really tough to do, but this is the new style of learning. It's a little more digestible than reading a whole book or watching a 30-minute YouTube tutorial. So I think that's kind of steered the process too. It's this compressed time frame. People are learning things in a much faster way now. Producers are becoming incredibly adept. In 2 years, they're learning everything that would take 10 years when I started.
You mentioned the cards, and I want to talk about those, so let's just jump in. We're going to be talking about workflow as well. Your quick tip cards, I actually looked at a couple of the Instagram posts, the reels, and my first question is why? Why did you create these cards? How did it come about?
First, it was just a selfish need to keep track of these, what was working in the studio. When something was really clicking and I was like, wow, I'm getting into a flow state, it was recognizing that happened, writing it down, what did I do to get to that place? Because you're going to forget it. It's just like trying to remember a melody in your head. You really should write it down. Despite what Jay-Z says, if you can't remember a verse, it's not worth keeping. Like, ignore that. Most stuff you'll forget. Your brains just aren't made for that,
right?
Unless you're some sort of savant. With perfect pitch and perfect memory.
How many cards are there?
There's 56 cards.
Okay.
And today we're going to talk about 40 of them. It's going to be a lot of information.
Right.
But
can you just give us an overview? I know you're going to jump into it in a minute, but just very quickly, like a nutshell of what these cards. If I believe that some of the people are getting cards, right?
Everyone's getting them. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like Oprah.
So when they when they open them up, what do you want them to get out of that?
Well, the crazy thing with this is like each one of these cards could be something that could unlock your creative potential in some way, and I don't know what it will be. So everyone reacts differently to different cards. Everyone has a different favorite. It could be, sometimes some of them don't resonate with people, and then they find one card and they go, oh my God, color coding my cables changed everything. And it goes across disciplines too, so it doesn't mean you have to be a music producer to take advantage of this. So I think I spent about 8 years developing these, and I wrote down the tips, and I created about 900 tips in a spreadsheet. And first they started as tweets. And I was like, can I encapsulate these ideas and really compress them into one place? Which is really tough to do. And I just did them. I put them in a spreadsheet. I randomized them on Twitter so that there'd be like 3 updates a day. And then I took the best of those and turned it into this card deck. So I had to really pare it down, and I use these every day. I mean, they're sort of in my head. I remember them, but you could use them in any field. You could shuffle them. You could dog ear them. You could focus on one card or like a cluster of cards, 3 cards in a day to focus on, especially if you're doing a collaborative session with somebody else. So everybody uses them differently, but I think the key is that they're actionable. And the whole idea is that it's a powerful visual. There's like these geometric visuals with a short headline and a tip. Whereas a book I found like was kind of cumbersome. Ableton put out a really good creative book on how to make electronic music, but it's 200 pages, and you're not going to like put a bookmark in and skim to that in the studio. I wanted something you could shuffle and stay creative. So like Brian Eno did the Oblique Strategies deck, which was really inspiring.
Right.
No visuals. And also Rick Rubin does a bunch of these as well, but they're just little quotes that are little sparks to get the process going, to get into a flow state. That's the whole purpose.
Well, why don't we just hand it over to you? I'll get out of the way, and we're going to talk workflow. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cards, and then you're going to create a song for us. So I'm going to get out of the way and leave Morgan to it.
All right, so we're going to do 2 major things today. Obviously, we're going to go through the cards, and there's 40 concepts we're going to go through today. But we're also going to build a song on the fly. So I don't really have a song prepared. It's going to be just feeling it out. All I've picked is a key. And I'm going to play to a kick, really simple. I've got 1 loop prepared, some claps, and some effects, and that's it. So we're going to really focus on the composition stage for that. Let's get into the presentation here. Here are the cards. So the cards are really like knowledge compression. I wanted to get a lot of these complex concepts, boil them down so that they're in your hand in the studio. You don't have to have your phone in the way. You don't have to get distracted by push notifications. I wanted something that I could take on the plane or be in the studio and get into a flow state faster. So the way that I do this is it's kind of a holistic process. It's a whole process that repeats itself. And to build and really have a process that is repeatable, I wanted to really chunk out these different categories. So all these tips fall into these 6 categories. And this crosses to tons of different disciplines. I have graphic designers using these, architects, people in the stock market, but the main focus started with electronic music production, because that's just what I know. Okay, so starting out, philosophy. Now, philosophy is my approach before I even get into the studio. This is going over mental models. It's my approach before I'm even preparing my materials and everything. It's my mental state before I'm even in the studio setup. Preparation is getting the materials and tools ready, getting the plumbing right, so I'm not going from left brain to right brain. That really messes with the creative flow. So I want everything needs to be plumbed out, all the wiring, everything needs to be correct, templates ready in that preparation stage. Composition is building the song note by note, beat by beat, and that is the generating the ideas stage, building those raw ideas, the riffs, the chord progressions, the melodies, the bass lines. That's all happening in the composition stage, and I want to work as quickly as I can in composition, and I'm not really thinking about mixing. I'm just staying in that one zone. And not everybody knows what a flow state is, but to me, a flow state, which is the whole purpose of this, is you're working so deeply that you don't think about eating, you don't think about going to the bathroom, you don't think about time. Time speeds up. And I remember before I even did music for a living, it was maybe when I was 12, I was working on remixes. I started really young, and I remember getting into a flow state for the first time, and I could just feel it in my blood that, this is what I was born to do. And it was only because I'd spent the time, I was up all night doing this remix in my parents' basement and thinking, this is an incredible feeling. I've never felt this before. I didn't feel this in school. So music unlocked a flow state, and obviously you can get into a flow state coding or doing anything. But there was something about putting enough chunks of hours of time into it that really got me inspired to do it. So I knew I was onto something, and music is really about recultivating and getting back into that state whenever you can. And it's not always possible. So, especially with kids and as life gets more complicated. So after composition, after we've built all these ideas out, it's the arrangement stage. And that really is spreading the ideas out for maximum impact. So today I'm going to build an 8-bar loop with chord progression, lead, bass line, percussion. But the point of that is if you have 8 bars, you can get stuck in that loop. So you need to flesh that out and bring those ideas out so that they have room to breathe, and then you're going to hear new ideas, new ways to combine the layers. You have to have arrangement, and you'll see in my template that I have little markers that'll show this is where the verses, pre-chorus, drop. There's a structure in there. It's not this amorphous blob of ideas. There needs to be structure. There needs to be tension. These are the guideposts that keep me on track during the recording process and the mixing process as well. Otherwise, you might repeat too many ideas over and over. And then the last step is maintenance, which totally doesn't sound sexy at all, but it's really this amazing forgotten step. We don't even think of the DAW like Ableton or Pro Tools. We don't think of that of practicing Ableton or Pro Tools. But this is really essential. We think of practicing an instrument or some other skill or playing the piano, but the process of producing and composing is all a practice, and I like to try to make it an addictive process. Try to find fun in the mundane maintenance parts. And then that kind of clears your head so you can recultivate your thinking and get back to making music the next time. So you're even faster in the next song. So as I mentioned, the whole purpose of this is you want to create a sustainable workflow. I've seen so many producers and DJs burn out. They get hot, they have one big song, and they go on the road, and then they can't begin the cycle again. They lose that flow state, or they lose what was driving them to make music in the first place. Some guys might get sidetracked by money or fame or all these other things, but the whole point is you get to do this for a living. This is the privilege you get, and more work creates more work. That's your reward. So I feel privileged to be able to do this for a living, but I think I had to kind of dig back into this philosophy, this way of really thinking intentionally about making music and making art to keep it going, to have a long career. And so the point is, get into this state and repeat it and keep going so it doesn't feel like a grind and it doesn't feel like a job. And then you love your work, and then you create more work, which creates better work. So it's a long process, but this is what's worked for me over the years. Okay, so we're going to dig into philosophy. Channel inspiration and avoid expectation. So when I'm in the studio, I really try to write a song with no expectations or outside influence. It's not for my wife. It's not for management. Sorry, manager over there. It's not for the label. It does need to be for the fans. It does need to hit It needs to resonate with the platform, with the fans, and for yourself. But if you try to make it for somebody else, you try to chase a hit, it's like coloring by numbers. It's like trying to trace something on paper. It's not going to feel the same, and you probably will miss that trend. It's what you're hearing on the radio is already an old trend. So it's futile to chase that, and you're not going to make pure art. So I like to really channel that, keep the expectations, keep the editor in your head silenced, and wait later on to edit. So just write fast, move quickly, break things, move on, and just follow your gut. All right, seed versus graft. In agriculture, I found this really interesting. They have the scion, which is the top plant that is grafted to the rootstock. And in music, I found if you try to create everything from scratch, if you try to build a new guitar for every song, if you try to reinvent the genre and try to be really clever, it often doesn't work. You really need to copy a lot of the existing elements, go back, listen to what worked on hit records 30 years ago, 50 years ago, go back and cross-pollinate with that older DNA of a song. But you can't expect to build everything from scratch. It's a fallacy to think that everything is 100% original. So you're always going to be borrowing. There's no real original chord progression. Even melodies are recycled and just slightly tweaked, and it's just using different timbres of instruments and other layers. So it's really funny. I think sometimes I think I'm creating a new chord progression, and I've totally subconsciously lifted it from somewhere else. It happens all the time. Haven't been sued for it yet, but that's the creative process. So if you can hide those brush strokes enough, you won't get sued. Or just do a cover. That's the best loophole there is. Cover a song that was a hit, and somehow that's your song now. Instead of you sample a second of that song, you're in trouble. Also with seed versus graft, I think it's really important to commit to a genre. In my early days of making music, it felt cheesy to commit to a genre and have structure, but that's essential. It's got to compete and find a lane. People might say like stay in your lane, which is true to some extent, but you got to innovate enough, but stay within the framework of a genre for it to hit that audience. When I DJ, I can't just play random music. The songs have to work together. They have to be in a similar time signature. Even when I'm mixing a song that's done in triplets to a song that's done in regular note divisions, they'll clash, and that's just in the dance music world, so I have to think about that. So there's all these considerations, but respect the genres. You can innovate a little bit, but you've got to, move on from that and just use what's working already in the existing canon of music. All right, controlled failure. Actually, we're going to do virgin birth. Virgin birth. There is no virgin birth. So there's some really good books. Steal Like an Artist talks about birth, theft, and influence. And as I was talking about, like everything new is simply a combination of things that have worked in the past. It's almost impossible to find something that is completely original synthesis. So really, it's all about how are you weaving these things together. Nothing's made from whole cloth with all these elements. So when I did the song Longest Road, it was about taking dance music and bridging that with a bit of country, with slide guitar, and a bit of folk, but just enough. And actually I had too much cross-pollination. So Deadmau5 did a remix, he took the slide guitar out, he simplified it, the song blew up. So it had a vocalist who didn't sound like she did dance music. She was on the fringe of country and folk, mixed with dance music, and it was enough that timbre voice grabbed people's attention. So I think we played with the constraints of genre there, but innovated just enough and borrowed enough from different genres. So wide theft is originality, narrow theft is plagiarism. Controlled failure. So for me, the process of music always begins in the composition stage with failure. It's creating music is just repeating controlled failure privately. And thankfully, it's not fatal. It can be temporary. You can throw out these songs. It's a private performance. So every process starts, and I start a song, and I go, I can't do this anymore. Like, this sounds terrible. You've got that inner doubt that's forming, and then something like 20 minutes in clicks. Maybe it's 2 hours later, and then it's process of elimination. Your brain knows exactly what to do next. The muse is informing each step of the process. But there's that moment of doubt where you go, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Even though I've done this for 25 years, it sounds terrible. And there's always that magic moment where it's a few steps in. It's after the chord progression, maybe you're doing a lead over the chord, and something just combines, and it's a catalyst. So when I've talked to professional songwriters, they always say, guys that just focus on the lyrics and the melody, they often have, guys like Pooh Bear, who does a lot of Justin Bieber records, he maybe 10% of his songs will get picked up by an artist. And most of them fail. Failure is the default state for the creative process. I don't know why. It's just that enough things have to line up to create a successful product. But he submitted over 100 songs to Bieber, and he turned him down. And he sings amazing. We've worked in the studio, and he's an incredible producer and songwriter. Quality versus quantity. All right, so one of my favorite tips, I think you really need to build a volume of work to get to quality. And Rick Rubin talks about this a lot. If you write one song a week and you do that for a year, maybe it'll work out. But you're not greasing the wheels enough, and you're not creating enough output. So you're not getting to that final sound that can be achieved by doing 3 songs a day or 2 songs a day. So I try to do a draft a day. It doesn't always work out with travel and everything, but I try to do a song a day. Sometimes I can do 2. And I build these ideas so fast that I can't even remember ones that I've done. I go back and listen to them months later. So there's really no way to get to quality without quantity first, which is a crucial part of the process. It'll also help you iterate and move more quickly, build better templates, move that way. Gut versus logic. So I like to outpace that left brain logic, that sort of part of your brain that's talking to you, and use faster gut decisions. And the simplest way to do this is circadian rhythm. So I like to work in the morning. I like to work at night. I avoid the middle of the day. Today is going to be an exception. I'm going to have to make the muse work in the middle of the afternoon. But usually I would reserve this time of day for conference calls, emails, meetings. It's sort of the black hole of the day that you can use to, maybe it's 12 to 4, 12 to 5. But something in your brain just changes in the morning and changes at night, and the ideas come about 3 times faster, so if not more than that. And also repetitive motion is a big one for me to get into that state. So it sounds so basic and simple, and you think it can't possibly be that simple, but just getting out, working hard, but then moving, doing something kinetic, something repetitive always seems to work. So I do trail running, walking. I like doing walking meetings, Japanese meetings. That's one way to do it. Develop systems and avoid routines. So I always say, I feel like you fall into a routine. You don't fall into a system. And for me, that system can be what time of day you're working, like when the creative flow is best. But you also want to have a way that when you've built a good setup, a good system, but you want to keep it fresh and not get tunnel vision. So that's the balance. So it can be as simple as changing your route to work or picking your kids up from school from a different way. That's a way to keep your thinking fresh. Change your environment, change your tool set, change your schedule to just change the patterns a little bit. But I think first you've got to build in that structure that works for you so you can work quickly and make art quickly. All right, embrace wabi-sabi. And I heard this amazing quote the other day that said, there's 3 simple realities, that nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. And the funny thing about perfection is, you think about it, it's subjective. Perfection is subjective. What is perfect to you, it might be perfect, a different definition than what is perfect to the label or to your fans. Totally subjective. I think you can get quality, you can be defined by something that meets spec, meets a certain level of quality, a certain tolerance, but perfection is really vague. It's really arbitrary, and often perfect music doesn't sound great. A perfect mixdown might not sound amazing if it's too balanced. You want balance and you want cohesion. You want it to sound like a finished record, but seeking perfection is a false quest. Daily discipline reaps reward. So, as I mentioned, I like to do draft days. I always like to say applying daily discipline is better than waiting for inspiration to strike. So you got to get in the studio to receive the muse. If you get that idea, if the muse comes to you in the shower and you're in a hotel and you don't have your gear near you, it's going to be hard to translate that idea. So I think get into that, build that discipline, build that muscle of getting in the studio so you can capture those ideas when they come, because they're fleeting and they move fast. Preparation. All right, so preparation is all about where we're gathering the materials. We want to get our palette together. Pooh Bear, this pop songwriter I mentioned earlier, he starts all his sessions with a list of song titles. And I thought this was so genius. I'd never seen anyone do this. Just titles, and they're jumping off points. And those titles inspire metaphors, locations, situations. That helps him begin the process. So he's not starting with a blank canvas. So I always recommend capture these seeds, get song titles, lyrics, melodies, chord progressions, samples, build them in an organized central system that you can get to. And that's key. You got to be able to, instead of storing and forgetting, build that system and find a way to easily get back to it. So if you're building a blank canvas and you're building a new guitar or a new synth for every song, that's insanity. Like, you need to have a starting point, and that provides the momentum. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in inertia. So I like to build that vault ahead of sessions. And what I found too is when people feel like they have writer's block, it's really that they have a partial palette. They haven't gathered enough research or enough raw materials. A lot of authors I've heard about, like Ryan Holiday, uses an index card system. So he puts a single idea on every index cards, and when he knows a book is ready to write, when he's done the work and he's got an entire tray of index cards with these ideas. You can throw out the bad ones, you can categorize the good ones. It's an incredibly effective system if you're a writer, and for me, that's how I did the tips. So I think if you can assemble and curate a palette, the work will write itself. It'll work much better. You've got to start out with the right drum samples, one-shots, tonal sounds, effects. If you gather those palettes in the right place, the right drum samples, the process is going to move much faster. So I will build those into templates. But you do have to stay on top of it and reintroduce new sounds, new elements, keep it fresh, and recultivate your sound. So I go buy new sample banks. I go to Splice and mix it up with that. Kill the periphery. Now, this is a pretty tight desk setup, but what I like to do in the studio is I like to remove anything that's within an arm's reach. What has to be within a grasp? And it's usually the keyboard, the mouse, whatever, but everything that is here that's not part of your process, it's not essential, is going to take up room in your subconscious. You're not going to be able to, your brain is picking up all this mess of cables and whatever you have. So if you can tuck the cables away, if you can move things, I just like to think what can be removed from the setup for a better process. Even the lighting in the studio changes how you hear. Even the way your plugins look, the color scheme and how slick the interface looks, that changes how you hear things. So these little subtle perceptual cues really change the creative process. Okay, define your legend. So create your own system for naming and ordering files and devices. And I use this for templates. I color code cables. I group gear together. One way I do it is I create nomenclatures. I create naming systems in series. So if I have a bunch of Samsung drives, a bunch of T5s, they all look identical, I name them Marvel characters, and then I color code them so that the disk image on the desktop is color coded, and each one I can identify which is which because they all sound the same. So you got to rename them, color code them. You could even texture code them if you want to. I have stuff in my bag where I'm getting ready for a gig, and I know the feeling of this piece of gear feels this temperature. It's like before a show. It gets as granular as that I'm like, oh, I know that's my power supply. It's got a glossy finish. All these little things add up, these little details. So especially if you're doing video editing and you need lots more drive, you need lots more components and peripherals, you've got to add some novelty that'll help you remember things. So it could be Marvel characters, it could be planets, colors, Greek gods, whatever it takes, rather than a series of numbers. So color coding, I like to do it so both ends of the cable, whether it's power or MIDI or data or whatever, I like to try and label it with some masking tape just to say what it is on both sides of the cable, and then try to color code it so I can group things. And you really have to build your own system. But and also having metallic colors in a dark studio. If you've got glow-in-the-dark cables or metallic ones, that helps a lot. But just the simple act of color coding so you can differentiate one black cable from another will go a long way. We talked a little bit about this already, but better workflow equals better art because better workflow is less friction. If you have a ton of friction in your process, it's going to feel like a grind. And to me, these tips are all about greasing the wheels. The wheels are the hard work, but if you can just grease those wheels so that the process can move more smoothly and with less friction, you'll be more streamlined. And gradually, you improve your process, you find out what's working in your template, what's not working, and you move along. Building templates. Okay, so we're going to dig into my template in just a minute, but I like to use living templates. And what this means is instead of having a static template that you commit to, it's a jumping off point. So I start out the template, and I have certain groups of tracks, and things evolve rather than starting over every single time. It's like we're not starting from scratch. So instead of one master template, you could also have like, this is my songwriter template that's divided up by verse, pre-chorus, chorus, breakdown. You have that structure versus a remix structure. Create some very basic starting points so you're not locked into it. I think that's the mistake a lot of people, including myself, made was I would build an incredibly detailed template that had too many instruments in it, too many plugins, and it was cumbersome. So just think of it as a container to start with. So let's look at the DAW. We're going to use Ableton today. Now what I have at the top, even before we get to the tracks, I have markers for all the sections, and I can jump to every little section of the track to see like, oh, do we need that chorus to rep twice the first time? Usually you want like one repetition of the chorus the first time. What does it sound like going into the breakdown? So everything is in 8-bar chunks. These are all triggers at the top. If you look at the top there, these are triggers that affect the plugins and the tracks that are going to keep things pumping and moving in real time. But I have everything in 8 bars just so I don't get lost. So I know that, oh, this chorus is 8 bars and it's going to repeat twice. It just keeps me on track. These are my guardrails. And everything's organized in groups. So I've got those triggers. I've got kick bus in blue. I've got drum bus, chord bus, lead bus. It's typically the order I'll compose in too. Mid bass, that's just all my bass layers are going to be in there. And then I have a little vocal sample we'll chop up today. And then an effects bus. And then a master. And this is a very lean template. This is about as lean as you can get it. And I've got Serum as the synth, some EQ plugins, some Valhalla reverb, just some basics in here as we compose. But we're going to get to that in a minute. So that template has been built over 20 years. I've taken things out, added things in. This is very lean, especially for today since we're doing it on the fly. Be prepared to be spontaneous. So I like to take care of the logical left brain activities ahead of time so you can focus on the right brain without interruption. You don't want to go back and forth. You want to stay in that flow state. So we can use all these things like templates and color coding and automation. You can batch tedious tasks that you feel like repetitive. So work smart rather than hard. And if you find yourself repeating an activity over and over again, see if you can make a macro for it. See if you can create a combination of keystrokes that will accomplish that. Or you can do it in Ableton. You can have one knob that controls 8 different parameters or 40 different parameters. I also like to make sure everything's tuned and that the gear is functioning. It's always good to have everything wired up and ready to go. A lot of times, I don't know why, I'll have a gear that's plugged in and turned on, but the MIDI's not connected, or the setup keeps changing at my home studio. So I think it's a good idea. You can actually wire stuff up and store it. If you have a good setup where you can push the shelves in, everything's wired in, instead of reconnecting fresh every time. Okay, so now we're going to get into the juicy stuff, and we're going to start with a kick and some chords. So, and the way I start this, you have a blank canvas, you got a kick. I'm going to play everything to the kick, but you want to take one small step. And for me, that's going through presets, finding a preset that jumps out at me. And I've already gotten some presets that I know are already inspiring, so we've skipped that step. But I'm going to play a chord, and there's a lot of different ways we can approach this. So I'm going to be playing to a kick. There's kick and a little bit of effects in the background. And there's 2 different ways you could approach this. You could do a block piano style, or you could do a more syncopated way. And a lot of times I get demos of songs, and block piano means it's just sustained. It's just, it's very like quarter notes, just drawn out. There's no rhythmic drive to it. So I'm going to skip that. I'm not going to do sustained block piano chords. I'm going to do something syncopated. So let's just riff around here. So I've kept it really simple deliberately because maybe I want to play some other layers on top of that. So we're going to quantize that. I'm going to do some riffing on the lead here. Let's try. And I haven't even turned on the side chains yet. So the side chains are going to make it pump. it's not progressing a lot. It's just moving a little bit. There's already some rhythmic interest, and it's moving along. And maybe we'll add in some more arps to keep it moving. Let's do a shorter arp. It's already getting busy. We're 2 layers in, and it's already busy. So I like that last little bit in there. But it gets busy fast, especially when you're playing syncopated, and I don't want to fill up every hole in here. And maybe we'll bring this lead up a little bit. So we already have this rhythm that's defined, and it could be the vocal phrasing or the lead or the chord progression. There's so many different ways to do it. So we'll come back and add some more layers in a minute. So we've already broken the inertia. We have momentum. We have a song that's moving along. There's a progression. I think the bass line will probably just be the root note of that, and it'll echo it. So it's already getting formed. But I want to start out with broad strokes. So we are going to fine-tune things later. If you get buried in polishing the atoms and all these granular details early, it really holds back the main elements. We want to get to the steak of the song. So instead of focusing on white noise and effects and atmosphere and build-ups and how loud the song is, like forget it. Don't pay attention to that stuff. That can happen later. Window dressing can be happening later. This is the foundation of the song we're building. All right, so for me, the beauty of music is that it can change every time because the sequence that you compose changes everything. If I start with a click instead of a kick drum and I'm playing to that, that'll change how I play. If I start with the kick and then the clap, that's going to sound different than starting with the kick and then the hi-hats. So just changing that order of the percussion changes everything. So if we go back to here, I have 2 loops in here. One loop's a little busy. And then I'll save the center hi-hat for later on, the thing that kind of props up the middle of the groove. See, without them. So I'll compose differently to a loop in the kick versus just the kick. And it's crazy. It'll drastically change how your phrasing, the presets that you'll pick, and then the treatments that you'll apply. All right, and one of my favorite parts is that just these small details, like just the effects that you're monitoring with, if you're recording vocals and you have no reverb on there and the vocalist goes, I'm just not feeling it, and all they need is just a little reverb, maybe it needs some delay, maybe a slapback delay is going to inspire it. Maybe you're recording guitar and the treatment will actually change the density of the notes you're playing. If you're the edge, you're going to play with delays. The delays are part of the instrument in his sound. So he's going to play something totally different that's very difficult for someone to recreate. So I like to think of that as that the effect is also part of the instrument as well. So I say always try to aim for the right tone. And it can be really overlooked. Even as you're monitoring with autotune on, that changes how you sing, for better or worse. I love tracking with autotune on sometimes, and I love going completely naked into autotune without autotune and tuning it later on. You're going to get a different performance. Also with guitar, if you're doing something that's really distorted and you're putting a lot of harmonics in the mix, there's good harmonics, there's bad harmonics, but if it's really dense, you can't play as many notes. There's not as much polyphony. So you can't fit as many notes, so that maybe that distortion is going to inform a simpler melody and help you narrow down your choices for the melody. And it'll change your choices also for the chord voicings and the arrangement of the song. So as we build this song, I like to think, what is the engine room? What is driving the song? What is powering it forward? If I just did the block piano chords, If I just did block piano chords, it would just feel slow and have no movement. But maybe I'm getting the movement from the percussion. Maybe I'd be adding loops on there. So I'd be piling on these loops. They would make it busier and busier and like a muddier mix. So for me, I like to create that movement, but where is it coming from? Is it coming from the arpeggios? Is it coming from the bass? Is it vocal syncopation and phrasing of the lyrics? Is it the LFOs and the wobbles, or is it the drum loops? So if you look at artists like Deadmau5, I think he does an incredible job. It's a kick, a center hi-hat, and a clap, and all that movement is coming from all the chord stabs and the melodies. Why not have the melody stand in as percussion and the melody itself? And if you can make the melody and the bass line and percussion all in one, you got a triple threat. A big part of this building every song to me is unresolved tension. So with a loop like I'm building right now, this is a kind of a narrow progression, but I like to have a loop that at the end, the last chord is not resolved. Like, how can I avoid it resolving and going back to the one, back to home too quickly? That's the mistake that we often run to. I mean, it becomes a nursery rhyme or like a bad folk song if it just resolves too easily, and it's like, great, it's awesome, but you need tension to balance out your song, and you need that. That just props up the song. It gives it some backbone. So I like to do that also beyond just the chord choices and the voicings, but also melodies, stable and unstable notes that may seem a little dissonant. Those can go a long way. Drones can add tension, just a single note drone. So like down here, I always forget to add these in tracks, and then later on they add so much atmosphere. This whole time there's been a drone in the background, just one note. It's the kind of thing you mute it and you miss it. So that and a little bit of white noise adds a little tension, and those are great for breakdowns, great for build-ups, you name it. Also, you can create tension through automation, automating the parameters so that things wobble and move and create that density of sounds and make things more aggressive and then open up and relax in the breakdowns. Leads. Don't bury the lead. So I really like to let the lead shine. I think there's an old term, I think it was a theater term of using foils, using the other counter elements in melodies to make the lead shine. So sometimes I'm just filtering things down to allow the lead to shine, but you have to step back as an editor of the song later on, mainly when you're arranging, and say, like, where is the lead? Why is the lead not loud? Why would you put the lead in there if it can't be the lead? So let it do its thing. And even with every section of the song, I want the drum fill to be the drum fill. Let that be the fill. Don't have the build-up clash with the lead. Let each part be itself and play its role. These are all characters on a stage. So let that lead shine and do everything to support it with the other elements. So you're going to have to use a lot of contrast so notes aren't stepping on each other. If you're using a really plucky sound as the lead, the chords should be a softer attack. They should be more of a pad. And lead is sort of a general term, but the lead could be a synth lead, a guitar solo, a vocal, and what I like to do is just let them take turns. Let the roles swap out. One goes off stage, another comes back on. That's really helpful. You obviously see that in with guitar solos. You're not going to have the lead vocalist singing while the guitar solo is going. Okay, so let's stay on the lead. We're going to go in the DAW. So we've got a chord progression, we've got some moves. I'm going to try some of their little lead bits. Might want something a little higher. We already kind of have a lead in there, but... I'm going to add some treatments to that so it doesn't sound so plain vanilla, but we'll get there. So that's a little bit of tension right there, just a little bit of a trill, a couple notes in the end that sort of set it up so when it loops, you go, oh, that's satisfying. And God, it's even like doing loops for TikTok. You want a seamless loop, something that draws you back and it doesn't feel like there was a stitch or there was a seam. All right, so I'm going to add a little rhythmic thing to the lead here. Oh, sidechain. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of rhythmic treatment on this. Already a lot less plain vanilla. And all we're doing is chopping that lead into a little bit of notes. We're taking information out of it. And I could change those note divisions. So you get the idea with that. So let's try a little bass on there. Try something really simple. That's too simple. Let's make it a little more syncopated. Sidechain on there, just so it pumps, because the bass takes up a lot of information. All right, so we got a little bit of a mini song going. And the only other layer I would add in here, because we have some atmosphere, have some effects, maybe a little vocal chop. So I put a sample in here. I haven't chopped it up yet. Sort of Indian sample. So a lot of times I'll go in, I'll chop vowels up. I'll try, I'll avoid consonants and other elements that just don't have any emotion in them. So usually vowels. So let's go in. Let's see what we can chop. So like there, get that. And I'm going to make it rhythmic. So let's move this guy over. And I like to do it just random. I have no idea what it's going to sound like. We're going to throw it in there. Let's move it around. You can always do something simple, like make it a hi-hat or something, make it a center hat that props it up. Let's put a sidechain on. Okay, let's hear it unsoloed. So I go through, it doesn't work, let's compress it some more, let's add some more treatment. And you see immediately, oh, that wasn't working, okay, bring these up. Let's put something a little more aggressive on here. So we're propelling the song forward just using one little vocal sample. There's no real words in there. It's being used as a rhythmic element, a melodic element. It's also kind of setting a drone in a way. And I can even change the loop. If I want to change the loop brackets, go part way through. Like a really short loop for ideas. And then drag that bracket over. So you get the idea. All right, moving along. We did our bass. Rule of three, this is my favorite one. So I talk to mix engineers all the time, and Jack Joseph Puig said to me, he said, have you heard of the rule of three? And he's like, that your brain can only really focus on three elements at once. It's almost like the shell game, where you're moving a bean through three different cups or a ball through three different cups. Your brain cannot divide its focus. It's cognitively limited to three things, possibly less, possibly two. And it's just the bandwidth that we have to process things. So I'll rotate elements. Maybe it's the three elements are the drums, the chord progression, and the vocal. And then maybe I'll rotate it so that the bass line is just, or the breakdown is just the vocal and a bass line and one other element. So if you rotate them, like rotating a radio dial, you can alternate between these different phrases. But ultimately, there's like three layers, and that's all you get. And everything else is going to be masked out, or you're going to have to just shoehorn it in the mix. So I try to limit it to three key elements, and it really makes the mix-down process much faster. And I use arrangement to spread those elements out later on. Okay, so moving on to arrangement. Another great engineer, I think Chris Lord-Alge said, arrangement is the mix-down. So if you have your song properly arranged and you spread out the ideas so that it has the structure of a song and it feels like a record, if you spread them out enough, the mix becomes much easier. You're not layering everything at once. You don't want all these elements firing all together. That is crucial. So I build with purpose. I build, let the breakdown, maybe the breakdown has the vocal and there's more space for it in there. Like in dance music, the drop is the highest bandwidth moment where everything's firing and it's got to hit hard on the dance floor or the crowd looks up at you and says, what's going on? So you've got to build purposely for each section and then mix with intention in there. So I just want to use arrangement to spread those ideas out. And I want things to pay off. I want the build to be a little bit quiet, and then bam, the drop hits, and that is the loudest moment. So I actually duck the volume down just before the kick comes back in. So it's a crucial way to do it. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for overlayering and overcarving with EQ and putting too many plugins on. So it's much simpler. Spread out the ideas, let them develop in each section, and have fun with the breakdowns. It's easy to just sort of, you could solo sounds. Instead of listening to everything at once, I'll audition in solo groups of sounds to get an idea of like, maybe this combination will work in the breakdown. So this is also great for creative methods. If I'm soloing different combinations, I can keep fresh ears on like what's working in the song. Because you want to be objective. The problem for me, most of the time, is I've heard a song 500 times. How do I unhear it? And once you've heard it too many times, it's really hard to evaluate your work. Is this good anymore? I'm not getting goosebumps anymore. Like that's how I start a song. I start with goosebumps, and then the drugs go away. So you've got to work with that. That's when you have to be the professional and be the editor later on. And you don't have the luxury of just this rush, this creative rush. You've got to be the editor, finish the song, make it a finished product that's going to translate and be shared with the world. So I'll go through, I'll solo the tracks, I'll solo the buses too sometimes, and just filter them around. So let's take a look. It's not a very dense song, but here are the lyrics. We're going to listen to our 8-bar loop, and I'm going to filter the chords. Chords are filtered down so I can hear a little more clearly what's going on with the leads. But let's say I'm sending this to a vocalist and I want them to record it. They don't want to have that vocal chop on there, so I'll mute that or bury that vocal sound. And I'll probably filter down the chords too, because you want to make room for the vocalist to be able to hear themselves when they're tracking a demo. Here. So if you do treatments to different combinations of the buses, it'll keep you much more objective with where your song needs to be. And zooming out, that's huge. All these micro changes you're making, they're really going to improve the song as a whole. I think we get really buried into these granular details of the EQ. And when I play a song for my kids, they're not asking me like, oh man, you did such an amazing job EQing that snare drum. They don't care. They care about the final product. And nobody cares how much time you spent on it. I think a lot of guys get stuck on that. Like, oh, it's amazing, it took you 20 minutes, or whether it took 2 hours. Nobody cares. They want the final product, and you've just got to move quickly and not hear the song too many times. Also, opposites attract. So I always find that the opposites attract to form a whole. And what I'll often do is I'll take a long kick, I'll pair that with a short bass, and I'll pair a short kick with a long bass. And if you don't do that, the elements are going to step on top of each other. And I use sidechain compression to help the elements kind of glue together. But I'll even do opposites attract, where I'll combine a synthetic source and an organic source. I'll take acoustic guitar and a synth and try to group them in a bus and try to make them merge together in a way. So I think you need that contrast. It's nice to have the randomness of live instruments with the quantized precision of synths. And a little of both goes a long way. I'll even just tuck in the live layers a little bit underneath. So I think of, in terms of opposites, in terms of the spectrum of the sound and time opposites. Like reversed swelling sounds and pads can make your song really breathe. There's one element in here we should play. There's a brass sound that has this really cool rip to it. Oh, here it is. This one's really hard to play without a strong attack. It's hard to play it, but you could pencil it in. Maybe this is a drone thing. I'm just going to put that in the middle here. And that can kind of set the tonic. Legato. So all these things I'm doing, I'm reinforcing the tonic and the feel of it, but that's the point of that, is that it's a slower attack and it's something that can build and push the song forward. And that's contrasting with like the plucky arpeggio sounds in there. All right, so with all of music and with this template that we're looking at, it really is the canvas we're working with is time. It's time and energy. So I always like to think, like, how are you using time and energy to express your song? Note divisions are a way of chopping up elements of your song, but are you leaving space between the moments? What is the groove? How are you using space in your song, and how are you using the energy of the spectrum? And mixing, to me, is all about distributing that energy, and energy in terms of it being a balanced song and a finished product. So we want to achieve balance in the mixdown, so it's going to translate to different sound systems, different audiences. I want it to sound amazing in a club, on the radio, on streaming, which are three totally different areas. It needs to be incredibly loud for the club. So maybe I'll do one mix for the club, and then I'll do, like, the extended mix might be really loud. And then for the radio, for radio and for Spotify, mix it a little softer for the radio edit. But it's got to translate to all, and you can't really pick where it's going to go and what medium people are going to listen to it on. Are they going to have earbuds? Are they going to hear it with a proper sub? And every club system I hear when I do sound checks, every club is completely different sounding. And I hear a different impression of it because I have near fields that I'm monitoring on. So it's a very different process. So I really say, like, energy is more valuable than time. We don't want to fight physics. No two sounds are going to occupy the same sonic space. They're just going to fight. So I like to spread out those bandwidth-hungry sounds across the grid. Spread things out. An arpeggio can be a really cool, like, low bandwidth way of creating a progression, but you're not layering all these voices on top of each other. In the arpeggio, all the little notes are taking their time. And that can be better than sustained chords. I like to say, too, fill the spectrum, not the pocket. So it's really tempting to fill every little spot in the song. And you can do, it's much better to do like a call and response melody, but if you feel every little chunk in there, there's going to be no room, there's going to be no groove. This is at 126 BPM, so it's already fast-ish, but it's full. It's already full, and I have a very, like, these loops aren't even that elaborate. It's like one top loop with a center hi-hat and a kick. I should just play you all these track by track. So there's a little bit of breathing room between the notes that are playing. There's little clusters of notes, 3 or 4 notes. And to me, that's key, using a little mix of long notes, short notes, just to have some contrast in there. But what I like to do is really present the spectrum, like work with all the octaves that you have. Take that bandwidth, don't throw it away, but don't fill every pocket in the drum loop. And it's very easy to overlayer and just fear layer your way through. A lot of times what I'll do is mids on the grid. I'll rush the highs, grid the mids, and drag the bass. So I'll nudge the claps just like 10 milliseconds early, just ahead of the main transient or the kick. And then I'll put the mids on the grid and then like delay the bass just a little bit. The bass needs more time to resolve. And it's amazing. Just even the kick drum, just moving something by a millisecond can change the entire impact of your drums. And every little piece, every sample, every millisecond makes a huge difference, especially in dance music. Simplify to amplify. So reduction is your most powerful tool. I like to look in my session and think, what notes or layers or plugins or presets and applications can be removed? And then once I have stuff that can be removed, what can I do to highlight those and intensify and exaggerate those elements? So I also like to exaggerate to balance. I like to define the extremes to find a balance in the middle. And what I'll do is I'll add on distortion, parallel compression, and I'll put it all the way to 100% wet and then dial it back, see what 30% feels like, see what 50% sounds like. And that way I can kind of get the best of both worlds. You're not stuck with this over-compressed sound. You mix in the super squash compressed sound with the dry signal, 30%, sounds great. And then other times I'll leave it much less balanced. If I want to push something way back, I'm not afraid of putting something like 90% wet, like a nice plate reverb on a lead, if I want that sound to be in the background. My main treatments we've used in the session are filters, distortion, reverb. Those are ways we're exaggerating it. We're sort of highlighting the harmonics. We're bringing the leads up. We're bringing it to your attention as a main character in the song. And this year it's been a big inspiration, photography, videography, working with a lot of like low light lenses and cameras and high res sensors, and thinking of depth of field, and then thinking of music as a stage for depth of field. So I'll push songs back in the mix, or push elements back in the mix, and I think of like blurring them out like a large aperture lens, and I want to just focus on this one element so it pops out and it's 3D and it's in your face. So happy to drown something in reverb if it's not a crucial element and make it more atmospheric. Push it to the back, and you're creating a soundstage. You're creating depth. So to create this blur, to create the bokeh, I'll use the filters. I use reverb, even lo-fi bit crushing plugins. There's ways to sort of crunch the sounds to improve them, and it can be counterintuitive. Sometimes a phaser will make something more monocoherent. Sometimes the bit crusher will bring out more emotion in a sound, where it's degrading the sound, but it's pulling more emotion out. I like to tune everything and not take it too far, and not limit it to just the tonic in the center of the key, but thirds, fourths, fifth, sixth. I like to experiment with different directions of the tuning. Tuning the drums, maybe I'll tune the snares up a fifth. But going in early, I like to write quickly and then go, oh, this is the key of the song I'm working in, and I'll tune things appropriately. If I get really nerdy, maybe I'll tune the white noise. I'll put a comb filter on there, and so every note in the key is being pushed up, and all the notes that are out of key are being notched out. Some guys take it really far and do that. Some guys will tune their reverbs to a certain key, which is pretty crazy. And there's some plugins that do that automatically. Maximum emotion, minimal bandwidth. So I like to aim for maximum emotion with the minimal bandwidth. What's really going to be pulling from your song. There's so many sounds that are inaudible, like super low bass sounds or really high transient clicks and ticks, and they will steal emotion and they'll take loudness from your mix, but they're not a crucial part of the song. They're not part of the story. So I think you have to go in and really define, say, this is my song. I'm in control of the sonics, and say, I don't need these plosive ticks on here. All these little things are going to take away from the emotional impact in the storytelling. So it's really important to go through. Somebody, a videographer, told me that says autofocus doesn't know the story. So there's no mixing plugin that's going to define what is the lead and what elements need to shine and what's taking up emotion. This is data. We're massaging data here. It's like a piece of clay that you're molding out, and you're spreading out this data to try and occupy more of the mix in a way. So you're taking out the high bandwidth data and trying to just massage it into being. So I like to use distortion as a texture to create presence and power. And I just think of it like, what's the minimum effective dose that's going to achieve the desired effect? You don't need, nobody says, like I used to think, my mix needs to be wider. Like, how wide can I get this mix? That's like saying, how salty can I make this dish? Like, it's all contrast. You don't need that. So what's the minimum effective dose? Get in, get out, apply the treatment, see if it resonates and makes the song emotionally immersive, and move on. Maintenance. All right, now this may seem boring, but this is really critical as we round out this holistic cycle, all these 6 stages. The importance of practice. As I mentioned earlier, we don't think about DAWs and practice. We think of rote instrument practice and doing the same scales and muscle memory over and over again. But I think you need to practice perfectly, not practice poorly. You need to, it's so easy to get lost tinkering in the studio and making small changes, and you're really just delaying fear and you're kicking the can down the road. Don't tinker, like dive in fully, go for full immersion. And you can practice and fail and just do that on your own time. It doesn't have to be in a session with somebody else. So you can do both. You can fail in front of people or fail on your own, but it's usually cheap and not as scary as you would think. So a big part of this practice is if you're playing the same riffs over and over again, you're never going to change. Your muscle memory, if you're playing guitar, you're going to gravitate towards playing an E probably. Like the interface is going to guide you to be playing a certain way, plus your own personal history of how far you took guitar lessons. Did you take it a couple months like I did, or did you take it for years? Like, you're going to have these tired muscle memory progressions lodged in your memory, and so I'll often change my interface. I'll try to play the melody on the bass guitar instead of a synth, or play the chord progression on a guitar instead of piano. So make yourself deliberately uncomfortable to get different results. That's one of my best hacks I've found. Otherwise, it's just never going to change. If you keep practicing the same scales over and over, not going to happen. Embrace the mundane. So I always like to say, chop wood, carry water. If you embrace these mundane everyday tasks, you may find that it's addictive and you fall in love with the process over and over again, the whole process. But I think you should first fall in love with enjoying the maintenance and getting past it being something tedious. And it's really important to look at it like fall in love with the benefits, not the outcome of the creative process. Love the process of that creative rush, those goosebumps later on. And then also love the editing part later on, which is tedious, but you got to do it to start the process over. So what I'll do to make it less tedious is I'll batch tasks together. So maybe it's maintenance Mondays, and I'll back up my sample libraries. I'll bring in fresh samples. I'll consolidate sessions, delete redundant files, go through, make sure, like, are there batteries that are dead that need to be replaced? That's the most satisfying thing to do. Just go through, find all your dead maybe batteries in the studio, or instruments that aren't working, strings that need to be replaced. You got to go through and just get rid of the maybes in there. And it's really easy to be like, just put it off. But if you batch them together, it becomes more fun. It becomes kind of addictive. So find a theme for a day of the week. Maybe you do your Reels work, TikToks and stuff on Tuesdays, and I do my mix show on Wednesdays. Try to find a theme that you can have some regularity, some consistency to the process. So that's going to be rewarded by better creative flow later on in the process. The last stage of all this, for me, is reflection. The last part of the maintenance is doing morning pages. I don't know if anyone here does journaling or morning pages. Sounds mundane, sounds woo-woo, but it's like, you got to do it. This is a way to just unblock your mind. You do 3 pages in the morning or whenever, longhand, write down everything that's bothering you, everything you're thinking about, things that you have just racking your brain, and it's like free therapy. So try to do 2 or 3 pages. You don't have to do it every day. I started doing that from the book The Artist's Way at the start of my career, and I've used it almost every day. So it's a huge part of the process. I recently started doing a digital journal. I started doing written journal, and I know, you know what? I'm never going to read my handwriting later on. I can't search it. Like, forget it. So I changed to doing a bullet point thing. I write 5 things that happened during the day, 5 notable things I learned in the studio. Just brain dump that out, get it on there every night before you go to bed. And then you have a searchable database later on. So I do an Evernote, whatever program, notes. And that's a practice you will keep up. It's sustainable. Writing it out, it just gets so tedious, and you're tired at the end of the day. There's no reason you can't do 5 bullet points at the end of the night. And then lastly, incubation, giving the songs time to rest, and then edit later on. And I typically will give a song maybe a month, 3 weeks, a month, if I have that luxury. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes there's a deadline, and I got to get it in. So incubation, Not a lot of people talk about it, but that's part of the process. And usually record labels take so long that they let you incubate it on your own anyway. So by the time that they've come back to you, the deadline's come and gone. So we look back now. This is the whole cycle we've gone through. It's been a hero's journey here, starting out with philosophy, preparation, composition, arrangement, mixing, maintenance. The cool part, maintenance comes back around to philosophy and the approach again. So as we've learned everything in the process, what worked during the song, what didn't work, write down your notes. That changes your mental outlook. You recultivate your instincts for the creative process, and then you begin it again. So this is like a flywheel. It's going to compound over and over with time. You'll be more prepared. You'll have your mental models written down. You'll be able to compose faster, arrange, and it just works in this circle. And I found this to be a really incredibly powerful process. So final thoughts. For me, the whole point of all this, the whole point of the cards, the presentation is how can we get into this achieving a flow state, keeping that flow state, staying in there, and then repeating it. And we want to create a greater volume of work. And as I mentioned, you want to do that through a quantity of work will create the quality. And there's no shortcut around it. You can hire a hit producer, you can hire an incredible team, but I feel like you as the artist or you in any discipline that you're in for content creation still comes back to you. Like I can't outsource my TikToks and Reels. I wish I could. I'd rather spend more time on music, but as a content creator, it all rests on you. You are the brand. You're embodying the content. So that's creating a greater volume of work for whether it's a reel or a song or any other creative work. And overall, the best part of this is if you get this great creative workflow, you're going to broaden the arc of your career. I've seen so many guys, they hit that peak and then they disappear completely. And that's not what you want. Why would you want a one hit and it disappears and go back to whatever job you were at before? So you want something that's going to sustain and last and be a source of income and a source of satisfaction, something you can support your family with. And the only way to do that is if you have a sustainable workflow. Thank you. We have time for questions. I hope you guys have some questions in there. There's a lot of information. Anybody? Yeah.
You talked about your trigger bus at the beginning. It was like your first track. Can you elaborate on how you drive that?
Yeah. Yeah, so the trigger, that's driving shaper box, volume shaper. So that is, it's sending to all the buses and saying, the kick is here. It's like a ghost kick, a ghost trigger. So I have it going drum bus, chord bus, each of those, and it's routing to shaper box. That just keeps it in time because the delay compensation in Ableton's kind of iffy. And it allows me to change it if I want to turn it off, change what it's synced to, change the syncopation. But it's an amazing plugin. Shaperbox, use that. You can use it for rhythmic effects, distortion, bit crushing, but it can all align to that trigger. So that drives everything forward. Sometimes I'll create a trigger guide if there's phrasing of the lead and I want to mirror that lead, the phrasing of it, and I will just copy that and trigger it with a hi-hat that'll add a little attack or a little noise to the lead sound. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
In terms of your workflow, when something that you said, if you're stuck on something, kind of just like maybe play it with a different instrument to kind of get new ideas going. But if you're at a place where you're like, I don't know, maybe just like pounding the same thing over and over again, at what point do you feel like you need to just stop and give it a rest? Like how long?
I try to go fast, like 10 or 15 minutes, and then you can take a break, but it's got to be like. But what always happens is I'll play it and it sounds kind of vanilla, and I'm like, it's okay, like it's fine, and then there's this it's like one layer that just makes the chord, so it's not just triads, and I'm playing a fifth up or a seventh or something unlocks when I do that, and that usually should happen. Yeah, it might be 45 minutes, as much as 45 minutes to be like for that thing to click. Might be longer, but I try not to throw stuff out. And if it's not coming immediately, maybe it's the wrong preset. But really the sounds inspire everything. So if the sounds aren't amazing, I would even go through, I haven't done this yet, but I would just delete all the presets you hate. So you're not scrolling by the same presets over and over again, the stock presets. So find a way to safely delete your factory defaults if you can. And if it isn't working on my hardware synths, since I can't rank them by rating, typically, I'll have masking tape and I'll write the presets on there. I'll write my favorites and I'll just jump around to a different preset. And usually that solves it. That song, that's got a little more attack and that's going to drive the rhythm, or that the harmonics in that chord just sound better. But I think it's move quickly. If you aren't loving it, like try to move along, or just, and you can always come back to it. Like my drafted days, most of them I throw out. So like maybe a third of them I'll use, maybe. Yeah. But don't be precious. That's the key thing. Yeah. Sorry.
So we're producers from New Zealand, and a lot of what you're saying is actually really resonates with what we do as well. So I was actually going to ask, when you're in a room, I guess when you're writing, do you ever sort of keep an audience's palette in your mind when you're in that process?
Yeah, it's hard because you have to serve so many masters with the process where it's like the platform, the algorithm, the label. I try to envision an audience in my head, like a crowd, at least for dance music. And I mean, first I want to excite myself and be like, get goosebumps. And it's funny because I think every song I put out, like, oh, it's going to be a hit. Like, and you don't have control over that because that's the climate. You know, you could hit every checkbox on there, but the climate's going to determine the box office for the movies or what hit song is going to happen, even if all the elements are in there. So yeah, I definitely want to, I like to consider the audience for sure. But I'll write even before I say like, is this my sound? I'll try to get it out. And stuff I've done for like SpaceX and Tesla is just drafts that I've done. I'm like, oh, make something that sounds spacey. Like just start with a theme, or I just feel like doing something ambient and I'm tired of doing 4 to the floor. And you never know where it'll end up. But I think it is good. You can't just compose for yourself. I think that's like the key lesson, though. Like you start there, but the editor in you does need to come in at some point and consider the audience. But I think the age-old problem that you have with people is that the fan base wants you to make stuff like you used to make, and doesn't want you to evolve a lot, especially like trance music. Like they want the trance family wants Armin van Buuren to make the same old Armin stuff or the same Tiesto. And I'm so glad they didn't listen to them. You know, it's like, why would you make the same thing over and over? But you've got to keep part of that. There needs to be a bridge in your music, I would say, that bridges your old material to your new stuff, if you can. Yeah. Hey.
So you spoke earlier about your release schedule being kind of like one song every month. How did you get to find that being something that really works for you? And obviously, does that work into your creative process as well?
It's tricky, and I think it's out of necessity with the label taking 6 weeks to ingest the content and put it out there, and so it ends up being by more than a month. But I found that if you just can't take a year off or 2 years off, I think the entertainment industry is like a merry-go-round, and it really does matter. Like you could take 6 months off, or maybe a year, or like. But I've seen some guys that they take off 5 years or 3 years, and it's not the same when they get back on the ride. I think you can take small breaks in between, but for me, for my fan base and everything, I think to be prolific and keep top of mind awareness, and it's crucial to have something out. Yeah, every month, every 2 months is fine, I think. Or we do a mix, like a remix, an original, a film TV license, something like that to mix it up. So it's like a rotation. But yeah, it's a little bit of pressure to keep stuff out there all the time. But I just try to build a stockpile of music, so I'm not like. Right now there's 9 songs that are almost done, and we're just trying to figure out, like, okay, which label should this go to, and is it done? Do we need to bring in someone else to finish this, or like, it's like, when is it done?
And just to follow up, do you feel that like a part of that is being unafraid to fail if the song doesn't resonate with an audience, and like that's okay, I've got the next one lined up.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. It's like if you're prolific enough, you won't be as precious with the music, and you'll make better music because you didn't hang on to, you won't be so hung up on that one song because you've got a ton. It's really crucial. I think that's what like Rick Rubin does in the studio, where I think people come in with 20 songs and they think, oh boy, we're done, the album's ready to go. And he's like, you got one, you got to rewrite everything else. That's like this most common role, is he's just eliminating in the process, and he's culling. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Did everything make sense with the workflow and everything? Yeah. Oh, in the back, yeah.
So you kept sidechaining a bunch of compressors. Is that off your trigger buses? Are you making a separate bus for that? Is it just kick? Are you continuing to add to that sidechain?
All the sidechains are are in the shape of the kick. I mean, pretty close to the kick. So shaper box, yeah. So it's, instead of being audio driven, yeah, they're just trigger driven. So each bus has shaper box on it. And sometimes I'll do the additional percussion will sidechain to the kick, but usually it's all to the kick. But sometimes I'll do dry chaining, what I call, like, maybe the vocal ducks down when the lead or the pads will duck down when the lead plays. But the best way I feel like is just setting up the right composition first, like almost compose with a sidechain in mind, and make it pump and move, and then sidechain just is the frosting on top. Yeah. But it never sounds right without the sidechain in dance music. It's just not enough room in the mix for that. Yeah.
Question in the back. When you are collaborating or you start thinking about collaboration with other artists, what comes first? Is it the conversation about collaborating, or do you start on a track and then decide, hey, this would be a good collaboration with this other artist? How does that work for you? It works different for everyone else, of course, but from your perspective, How does that work, and what's been the process around that for you?
It's a good question. I mean, it really revolves around stems. We both say, like, oh, we're fans of each other. You kind of like slide into each other's DMs on Instagram. And it's funny how it used to be scenes of music, like the New York sound or Chicago, whatever. And now I collaborate with people in South Korea and Germany and Canary Islands, and not everyone even speaks English. So it's an interesting process of communicating what's working in a song. But I never do Zoom calls. It's always just, hey, here's some drafts in progress, and we'll use SoundCloud or Disco as an amazing service. Sounds a lot better than SoundCloud. And we'll say, here's my works in progress. Let me know if anything jumps out at you. And people will send something to me, and I'll go, okay, I know exactly what I can add to this. Or I'll say, I have nothing to add to this. Sorry, but I love your work. That happens a lot where I go, this is incredible. Like, go release this. I don't need to be involved with this. But I think it's much stronger when you bring in collaborators, even though you're dividing up your writer share and things. You're usually better. It's more lottery tickets in the system anyways for a song to blow up. It's more reach. But I don't really think of it even strategically. It's just hiring your weaknesses. Work with people that are better at drops if you're really good at breakdowns, or if you're a really good vocal producer, hire someone who's better instrumentalist. So it's typically a swap of stems. We go around, I remove some things that they've done, they remove some things I've done. We butt heads on a few things, and then, boop, you have a finished track. And it can work really fast that way, especially with Ableton. I remember when a lot of people were not using Ableton, it was a little harder. So I used Pro Tools first, and then moved to Ableton for simplicity and for collaborations.
Can you talk a little bit about when you're writing a track and it's instrumental versus bringing in a vocalist, and what that process is, and when do you decide that you need vocals, or you're just going to use samples, or you're going to collaborate with a vocalist somewhere in the world?
Yeah, it's funny. Like we had a vocal sample on this track, which is, I don't even know who made it, and it's kind of faceless, and sometimes when you get samples, you don't know who even does it. So I've even used sample packs from vocalists that I've had in studio, which is really funny. But sometimes it becomes this faceless thing, and the vocal is used as like just a thing to propel it forward. It's almost just an instrument on its own. But the way I work is I will build these draft days. I'll mute the lead, filter things down so there's not a lot of competing high frequencies, and I'll send 3 or 4 to a vocalist, and I think, hey, I think this is perfect for you. Let me know if something jumps out. They will write a scratch track demo to that, send it back, and then I will rebuild the song around that. But in some cases, like with Lights, this song I did for Tiesto's label, Lights did the vocals. She engineered them. She laid all the tracks down. I literally like dragged it onto the draft, and the song was done. It was insane. Like, it never is that easy. So sometimes it's very seamless. Sometimes it's in person, and we're doing the lyrics in person, like with Lissy, with all the songs I've done with her. We're in there, and I'm looping an instrumental, and I loop it 5 or 6 times. I go make coffee, come back, and she's done Stream of Consciousness singing. And we don't even know what the song's called yet. We're doing mumble tracks first, and those mumbles sort of evolve into real words and real themes. And that becomes really tedious because I will be cutting up the mumble tracks and finding hooks in that. And then we'll do a re-sing with the proper lyrics. But there's so many different ways to do it. Sometimes a sample, in dance music, you don't want too many lyrics. So sometimes just a sample from a sample pack really works. And sometimes I think the songs that last and have some longevity are going to be real ones where you sweat it out in the studio. You spent days writing it on a notepad, and it's like, and you were all there in person, and usually have a vocalist sing over my shoulder. I don't even have a vocal booth. And keep it really simple, and you work together, and that's it, 50-50. That's the most pure form of songwriting to me. Anybody else?
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this masterclass. Give it up for Morgan Page. Morgan's been kind enough to hang out for a little while and do a little meet and greet out in the hall. So if you can make your way out there, we'll line you up and get it done. Have a great afternoon.